Alright, let's see. So this video is going to be about how to debug a ROS node, and so I've been meaning to make this video for a while. Debugging ROS nodes can be notoriously difficult because they're running as threads within the robot operating system, or ROS. So debugging ROS nodes is sometimes challenging. So let's see, this is my terminal window, and as you can see I'm sitting here running along, and all of a sudden I have a crash marked in red in my console output. So what has died? Well, the ROS UNC SLAM backend has died. There must be some kind of a problem, and we'll have to figure out what it is. So first thing we have to do is try and rebuild it so that it has debugging information. Now I've got lots of nodes in my workspace, and I don't want to rebuild them all. I just want to rebuild that one that's crashing, and I want to rebuild that one under debug mode to enable debugging. So I'm going to go into the CMake lists, and there's a option in my CMake list that I can set the CMake build type for debug for this target. So I'm going to enable that. So now that I've enabled by adding this, the building the debug, so I'm going to rebuild the node with debug symbols available and debug flags on. So I'm going to select this node, then clean compile just that node, and so it's going to do a package make args clean. So cat-can-make is going to just compile that one package all over again, clean compile. Okay, that should give us our debugging symbols. Now part of the real challenge of getting the debug behavior is setting all the environment variables that ROS uses. So, and there are quite a bit. There's sort of one way to go about doing that, which is to modify your .profile or .bashrc, or so that it has all these environment variables already set. But even then, they're not set to your specific development environment. So, the environment variables that the ROS node run from can be a problem when we're trying to set up debug. Further, we've also got to pass these arguments here to the node when we run it. We also have to set a couple of parameters from the launch file as well. So there's just a bunch of stuff to do. Alright, so we have at this point recompiled, and so you can see the -G option here is going to give us our symbols for debugging. So, and I can see the compile commands themselves by turning this CMake option on, so I can actually look at the commands used to compile my nodes and make sure that in fact the debugging information is going to be there. Okay, wonderful. So now I need to see how the node is launched, and so I'm going to go to the launch file that initiates my my node, and that launch file initiates the node here, run the SLAM backend, and it passes these two parameters, and so when I'm actually running my backend, it's going to use this SLAM backend launch. So I go to that launch file. Okay, so in this launch file, this is the node that's being launched, and it has two parameters. Those parameters and their values have to be handed off to when we also do debug as arguments on the command line. And so there's a specific syntax to setting the command lines on the parameters on the command line, and so we'll just and it follows the same exact format that we just saw in this crash output. So this would be the parameter name, and this would be the value I want to assign to it. I'm not sure that we have these underscores. I think that those are special, so I think it's just the parameter name itself. So we'll try and get to that. Okay, so we have it compiled. We'd like to debug it, but we have to create a debugging environment. So when we go to run things here, we have to create a debugging environment. There's a default sort of setup for running. If I just try and press run, it doesn't really work. This thing is not highlighted. So typically I have to be in a C++ file. So I'm going to select a C++ file or a header file in my code. Now this becomes available. When I press run, it says these are all the things that are built in your area that you can run. The one that I want to debug is this ROS uncc slam backend, so that's going to be the executable that I want to use when I press the run. And so of course if I run it, there's no ROS master URI, so that means that my environment is not set up. And what I'm going to do to debug things is I'm going to go to the launch file that would normally run it, which is this, and this will run it on the launch file if I have run slam backend equal to true. So I'm going to set it to false so that it doesn't actually get initiated. So now set it to false. Now when I run the slam front end, it will not run the back end, and I can run the back end by simply pressing the green button here, and that will run the back end. So here we go. We'll launch the file, launch the system. System is up and running. I can launch this, and it still doesn't work. Right? It doesn't work because the environment for this system isn't set. So even though it's running the front end and everything's operating, I can't run the back end yet. It just crashes. So I have to set the environment for the back end. So what I did is I wrote a little script to do that, and I'm just going to take that script and generate all the environment variables that I need to set in my back end in my project. So it's a little shell script I wrote. Let's see, convert environment to XML. So this is the command. You take env and you process it a little bit, and so this is the environment here that I want to capture, and so this generates all this XML. So I'm just going to copy all this XML that I have here. This is the total environment, everything that's in it, and that gives me, I'm going to copy it, so copy, and then I'm going to go into my project here, and I'm going to, you can add these things individually to your debug project by going to properties, run, environment, and then going to every environment variable and sort of adding the variable. So I don't have an interest in adding each one of those things individually, so I'm going to do a little bit of a cheat. So I'm going to open up the actual Netbeans projects file for it. So ROS workspace, source, there's an NB project here, and then within that private folder, I believe there's a configurations.xml. I'm using the default configuration, so I'm going to scroll down to whatever the default configuration is. So look for it, find default. Okay, so this is the default configuration, and we're going to scroll through it, and there's this little area called environment here, and I'm just going to paste all of that stuff in. So Control V, that's got all of my environment variables now in the environment. And so I will save that file. And now if I go to the project and I look at the ROS workspace and I look at the properties for the environment, well, all of the properties have been defined. I don't have to type them all in. Well, that's good. So now we have our environment set up. We've got everything set up to do our debugging. Now, the program that I was running has since finished, so I will have to run it again. And this is the launch command for the program that that launches all of the other nodes except for this backend node that I want to debug. And so it's going to launch now, and now it's running. And so now I'm going to go ahead and debug my node. And so it's going to run. It's in debug mode. Hopefully it'll start doing things. It starts up and it crashes, which is good. And so we can discard and pause and then do window, debugging, call stack, kind of figure out where we are. So I've got debugging information, and I know that in my code under get vertex indices within toString, that's where the crash occurred. And that, my friends, is half the battle when you're trying to debug these ROS nodes. So of course you can step through and you can do all sorts of other things, but in the final analysis, all debugging is now active for this ROS node. I identified the location of my problem, and now I'm going to look into solving it, which is not of interest for this video. So anyways, I thank you for coming and looking at this. I hope this helps you debug your own ROS nodes, and this should be able to give you the capability to debug ROS nodes even in complex workspace environments, which, as I said again, it can be a challenge. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.